Dr. Marcus Chun had spent his entire career studying things that should not exist. And now the government had given him the most impossible assignment of all: to find proof of beings that had hidden from humanity since before history began. His office in the newly formed Anomaly Research Division was buried deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, where thick rock and advanced shielding protected his team from any outside interference, and where they could work in complete secrecy. Every government on Earth has sent us their classified files. His assistant, Dr. Amara Ase, said as she walked into his office carrying a tablet loaded with more data than Marcus could process in a lifetime. And I have to tell you, some of this material is absolutely terrifying. Marcus looked up from the photographs spread across his desk. Images that dated back to the earliest days of photography. Pictures that showed ordinary people in ordinary situations, with one extraordinary detail in almost every photograph. Something stood just behind the main subjects. Something that did not belong. Shapes that had too many angles and shadows that fell in the wrong direction, and faces that smiled with expressions no human could make. The patterns are consistent across every culture and every time period, Marcus said, pointing to a photograph from Victorian England that showed a family posing for a portrait while a dark figure with no clear features stood in the doorway behind them. Whatever these things are, they have been with us everywhere and always. Amara sat down across from him and pulled up files on her tablet. The really strange part is what happens when people get too close to the truth, she said, scrolling through document after document. In 1923, a British researcher named Harold Whitmore compiled evidence of what he called the observers, and he gathered photographs and witness statements and historical records. And he was about to publish his findings when his entire research facility burned to the ground. Was he killed? Marcus asked. No, Amara replied, and her voice carried a note of wonder. He was found 3 kilometers away from the fire, completely unharmed, with no memory of how he got there. And he lived for another 40 years, but never spoke about his research again. Marcus leaned back in his chair and thought about what this meant. They protected him, he said. The same beings he was trying to expose saved his life and then made him forget. The weeks that followed were filled with discoveries that challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about human history. His team found records of battles where invading armies had suffered impossible losses. Soldiers dying from wounds that no weapon of that era could have caused. Entire regiments disappearing in the night without any trace. They found medical records of plagues that had spread across continents only to stop at seemingly random borders. Diseases that should have killed millions simply vanishing as if something had drawn a line and said no further. They found astronomical data showing asteroids that should have struck Earth changing course at the last moment, their trajectories bending in ways that violated every known law of physics. It is as if something has been protecting us all along, Amara said one evening as the team reviewed their findings. Not from ourselves, we have always been free to hurt each other, but from external threats, from anything that might wipe us out completely. Marcus nodded slowly. A gardener protects their garden from pests and weather, he said. But they do not interfere when one plant grows taller than another or when flowers compete for sunlight. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon when Amara burst into Marcus's office with wild eyes and shaking hands. I found something in Earth's background radiation, she said, barely able to contain her excitement. A signal that has been repeating for at least 12,000 years. Probably much longer, and it is not random noise. It is a message. Marcus followed her to the communications laboratory where massive screens displayed waveforms and data streams that meant nothing to him until Amara translated them. The message is written in pure mathematics, she explained. A language that any intelligent species would understand. and it says the same thing over and over again. She pressed a button, and a computerized voice spoke the words that something had been broadcasting from Earth. Since before the pyramids were built, this garden is occupied. The gardeners remain. You are not welcome here. Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It is not a warning to humanity, he said, understanding flooding through him like cold water. It is a warning for us, posted on our behalf, telling the rest of the universe to stay away. Amara nodded. Whatever lives alongside us has been protecting Earth for thousands of years, she said. Maybe longer, and they have been doing it without our knowledge or permission, treating us like children who need to be kept safe from dangers we cannot even comprehend. Marcus stared at the screen showing the repeating signal and thought about all the implications if these beings had wanted to harm humanity. They had endless opportunities across thousands of years. But instead, they had shielded the planet from extinction events and warned other species to keep their distance. We need to make contact, he said. Finally, Amara looked at him like he had lost his mind. Make contact with beings that have hidden from us for our entire existence, she asked. Beings that drove an entire expedition of archivists insane just for landing on our planet? They did that to protect us, Marcus replied. They saw the archivists as a threat, and they responded accordingly. But we are not a threat. We are the species they have been protecting. And I think they might be willing to talk to us. He turned to face his team. All of them brilliant scientists who had dedicated their lives to understanding the unknown. We know they are there now, he said. We know they have been watching us and protecting us and walking beside us in the shadows of our own perception. And I think it is time we stop pretending not to notice them. The decision was made, and Marcus knew there was no turning back. Humanity was about to meet the beings that had shared their planet since before memory began, and nothing would ever be the same again. The laboratory was silent except for the hum of machines and the nervous breathing of the scientists gathered around Marcus Chun as he prepared to do something that no human had ever attempted before. The signal is ready, Amara said, her fingers hovering over the transmission controls. We have converted our message into harmonic frequencies derived from the pattern in Earth's background radiation. Frequencies that should resonate in the same dimensional spaces where these beings exist. Marcus nodded and took a deep breath. The message they had prepared was simple. Just 12 words broadcast into wavelengths that human technology had never touched before. We know you are here. We want to talk. Please respond. Send it, Marcus said. Amara pressed the button. And for a long moment, nothing happened at all. Then every light in the laboratory flickered. The temperature dropped so quickly that Marcus could see his breath-forming clouds in front of his face. And the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and stretch in ways that made his eyes hurt to look at directly. There, one of the scientists whispered, pointing with a trembling hand at the far wall of the laboratory. A door had appeared where no door had been before. A rectangle of absolute darkness set into the white concrete wall, and as Marcus watched, something stepped through it. The being that emerged defied every attempt at description. Not because it was horrible or frightening, but because it seemed to exist in a constant state of becoming, assembling and reassembling itself from moment to moment, like a thought trying to take physical form. It chose to look almost human. Marcus realized as the entity settled into a shape it seemed to find comfortable. A tall figure made of folded light and patient darkness with features that were familiar, but somehow wrong in ways he could not identify. You called, the being said, and its voice sounded like dust settling in an empty house. Like the moment before sleep, like the memory of a sound rather than the sound itself. After all these thousands of years, you finally called. Marcus found his voice somehow, though it came out weaker than he intended. Who are you? He asked. The being tilted its head in a gesture that was almost human. I am what you would call a warden, it said, though names mean little to my kind. And I have watched your species grow from frightened creatures hiding in caves to builders of cities and dreamers of stars. Why have you been hiding from us? Amara asked, stepping forward with a courage that Marcus admired. The warden turned its attention to her, and Marcus saw Amara flinch slightly under that impossible gaze. We have not been hiding, the warden said. We have been waiting for you to see us, to acknowledge us, to speak to us with intention rather than accident. It moved through the laboratory without seeming to walk, appearing closer to the scientists with each passing moment. Your kind sees us more clearly than any species in the history of this universe, the warden continued. Not clearly, never fully, but you catch glimpses of us in the corners of your vision. And instead of forgetting like others do, you remember. You paint us on walls and carve us into stone and write stories about us and dream of us in your deepest sleep. Marcus thought about every myth and legend in human history, every tale of gods and spirits and things that lived in shadows. We created you, he said. Understanding dawning, not physically, but culturally. We gave you names and stories and roles to play in our imagination. The warden smiled, though it had no face that should have been capable of smiling. You made us relevant again, it said. My kind existed before this universe took its current form, and we seeded life across galaxies and watched it grow and fade and vanish. But none of it ever saw us, none of it ever wondered about us, until your species began to look into the darkness and ask what was looking back. The other aliens fear you, Marcus said. The archivists said you destroyed their expedition 12,000 years ago. The warden's form flickered with something that might have been amusement or might have been anger. The archivists came to study you like specimens in a jar, it said. They planned to catalog you and classify you and decide whether you were worth allowing to continue. And we did not permit this. We showed them what we are capable of being when we choose to be terrible. And they learned to stay away. Are you protecting us? Amara asked. Yes, the warden said simply. Why? Marcus demanded. What do you gain from keeping humanity safe? The warden was silent for a long moment, and when it spoke again, its voice carried something that sounded almost like affection. You tell stories about us, it said. You imagine us into existence in 1,000 different forms. You give us names and histories and purposes. And through your belief, you make us real in ways we had forgotten how to be. It moved closer to Marcus, close enough that he could feel the cold radiating from its impossible body. Every god your ancestors worshipped was one of us wearing a mask you designed, the warden said. Every monster under every bed was one of us playing a role you created. And we have grown to love your kind for giving us these gifts. So you protect us because we entertain you? Marcus asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. The warden shook its head. We protect you because you are our children in every way that matters, it said. Not biologically, we did not create your bodies, but spiritually, imaginatively, you have made us your parents and your guardians and your gods. And we have accepted these roles with gratitude. It began to fade, the door of darkness behind it growing wider. Tell your leaders what you have learned, the warden said. Tell them that humanity has never been alone. And tell them that whatever comes for Earth will have to go through us first. Then it was gone, and the laboratory was just a laboratory again. Ordinary and mundane, but Marcus knew that nothing would ever be ordinary again. Humanity had just learned that their imaginary friends were real, and they had been protecting the Earth for longer than civilization had existed. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez had waited 3 years for this moment, and now she stood before the largest gathering of alien species in known history, her heart beating fast inside her chest as she looked at creatures she could barely understand or describe. The Galactic Assembly Hall stretched for kilometers. in every direction, filled with beings of light and shadow, creatures made of crystal and gas, entities that existed in multiple dimensions at once, and species so old they had watched stars being born and dying. Humanity had done everything right. She thought to herself as she gripped the speaking platform with both hands. They had developed faster than light travel without destroying themselves, which was apparently rare, and they had reached out to the galactic community with open hands and peaceful intentions. And they had followed every protocol and respected every custom. Yet Earth remained under quarantine, and no alien vessel would come within 10 light years of the Sol system. And all trade had to happen at distant stations far from humanity's home. I stand before you today to ask one simple question, Yellen said, her voice amplified across the vast chamber. Why do you fear our world? Silence filled the hall, a silence so complete that Yellen could hear her own breathing echo back at her from the distant walls. The younger species shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their representatives exchanging glances that Yellen had learned to read as embarrassment or nervousness. But the older species remained perfectly still, like statues carved from ancient stone. Finally, a figure rose from the highest tier of the assembly, where the most ancient species sat in judgment over the younger races. This was Kethvorin, the primary emissary of the Archivists, a species so old that they had existed before most galaxies had formed. And his body was made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. You ask why we fear your world, Kethvorin said, his voice resonating through the crystal structure of his body like music played on glass instruments. But you asked the wrong question, young ambassador. Yellen felt her stomach tighten with frustration that she had carried for years, and she forced herself to remain calm and diplomatic even though she wanted to scream at these ancient beings who treated humanity like children. Then tell me the right question, she replied. Kethvorin moved slowly down from his tier, his crystal body chiming with each step, and as he approached, Yellen noticed that the other ancient species were pulling away from him, as if speaking about this topic made him somehow dangerous or contaminated. We do not shun you, Kethvorin said, stopping just a few meters from where Yellen stood. We shun what walks beside you, what has always walked beside you, what breathes in the spaces between your thoughts and lives in the shadows that your eyes refuse to see. The words made no sense to Yellen, and she shook her head in confusion. There is nothing on Earth but humans and the other animals and plants of our world, she said. We have mapped every corner of our planet, and we have cataloged every species, and we know our own home better than we know ourselves. Kethvorin made a sound that might have been laughter, though it sounded more like breaking glass. You call yourselves alone on your world, he said, but you have never been alone, not for a single moment in your entire history. And whatever shares your cradle with you is aware of us, ambassador, aware of all of us, and it does not welcome visitors. Murmurs spread through the assembly hall, and Yellen saw fear on faces that she had never imagined could show such emotion. Ancient beings who had lived for millions of years, looking like frightened children. What are you talking about? Yellen demanded, her diplomatic composure finally cracking under the weight of this strange conversation. Kethvorin's crystal body dimmed slightly, as if the memory he was about to share drained the very light from his form. We visited your world once, he said. 12,000 of your years ago, when your kind still lived in caves and hunted with sharpened stones. And we sent an expedition of our finest scientists and explorers to study the promising species that was developing on the third planet of your small yellow star. He paused, and the silence in the hall grew even deeper. None of them returned intact, Kethvorin continued. And the few survivors who managed to escape your world were never the same again, their minds shattered by things they could not describe. Their memories filled with shadows that wore human faces and spoke in frequencies that turned thought itself into poison. Yellen felt cold, despite the carefully controlled temperature of the assembly hall. "What happened to them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They encountered your co-inhabitants," Cathvorin said. "Beings that exist in the spaces between moments. Creatures that live in the corner of every human eye. Entities that have claimed your species as their own and guard you with a jealousy that makes our oldest wars look like children's games." The crystal being leaned closer, and Yellen could see her own reflection fractured 1,000 times in his body. "We do not know what they are," he admitted. "But we know what they want, and they want humanity to themselves. And any species that approaches Earth without their permission simply ceases to exist." Yellen stood frozen as the weight of this revelation pressed down on her. And she thought about every strange story from human history. Every myth about gods and monsters. Every tale of guardian angels and demons in the dark. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that something lives on Earth with us. Something that has been there since before we were human. And we have never known about it." Cathvorin nodded, his crystal form chiming softly. "You have always known," he said. "You have painted them on cave walls and written about them in your oldest stories and built temples to honor them and feared them in the darkest nights of your existence." He turned to address the entire assembly. "Humanity is not a species," he declared. "Humanity is a garden, and something tends that garden with absolute devotion. And we have all learned to stay far away from the gardeners." The assembly erupted into chaos. But Yellen heard none of it. She was too busy thinking about shadows that moved, wrong and feelings of being watched in all the tiny moments. In human history, when impossible things had happened and everyone had simply agreed to forget Earth, was not just home to humanity, something else lived there too, and now she needed to find out what it was. The news spread through the galaxy faster than light itself could travel, carried on waves of fear and wonder and disbelief as species after species learned the truth about the small blue planet they'd avoided for so long. Humanity was not alone on Earth, and the beings that shared their world were older than the stars themselves. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez watched the chaos unfold from her office aboard the diplomatic station orbiting a distant star. Messages flooding in from dozens of species who had suddenly decided that humanity was either the most valuable ally in the universe or the most dangerous threat to existence. The Shelrani want to establish formal diplomatic relations immediately, her assistant reported, scrolling through a screen filled with urgent communications. The Vorthik are demanding that we reveal the location of the Warden's home dimension so they can destroy it. And the Pelori have offered to surrender their entire empire to human control in exchange for protection. Yellen rubbed her temples and tried to process the scale of what was happening. "What are the archivists doing?" she asked. Her assistant hesitated before answering. "They have called for an emergency session of the Elder Council," she said. "And they are demanding that humanity be expelled from the galactic community entirely, or destroyed if we refuse to leave." Before Yellen could respond, her communication system activated with an incoming transmission from the highest priority channel, and Cathvorin's crystalline face appeared on her screen. "Ambassador Vasquez," the archivist said, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. "You have made a terrible mistake by speaking with these creatures. And now the entire galaxy will pay the price for your arrogance." Yellen straightened in her chair and met the ancient being's gaze without flinching. "We learned the truth about our own planet," she said. "We exercised our right to understand our own situation. I fail to see how this threatens anyone." Cathvorin's body flickered with angry light. "You do not understand what you are dealing with," he said. "The Wardens are not your friends or your protectors. They are predators of the highest order. and they have claimed humanity as their prey. They told us they protect us because we make them relevant, Yellen replied. Because we imagine them into our stories and give them purpose. Which sounds more like a partnership than predation. They told the predecessors the same thing. Kethvorin shouted, his crystal form vibrating with emotion. The predecessors were the greatest civilization this galaxy has ever known. And they trusted the Wardens. They believed they were special. And then the Wardens wiped them out so completely that only we remember they ever existed. Yellen felt a chill run down her spine. Why? She asked. Why would the Wardens destroy a civilization they claimed to protect? Kethvorin seemed to deflate slightly, his anger giving way to something that looked almost like grief. The predecessors grew tired of being watched, he said. They wanted to expand beyond their home system, to spread across the galaxy, and when they tried to do so, they encountered a young developing species in their path. A species they decided to eliminate to make room for their own expansion. He paused, his crystal body dimming. The developing species prayed for help, Kethvorin continued. They did not know what they were praying to, but they begged for salvation with every fiber of their being, and the Wardens heard them. And the predecessors ceased to exist within a single rotation of their planet. Yellen processed this information slowly, turning it over in her mind. So the Wardens destroyed the predecessors because the predecessors threatened another species? She asked. Because someone asked for help? Because their children asked for help, Kethvorin corrected. The Wardens view the species they protect as their offspring, their property, their beloved pets. And they will annihilate anything that threatens those species if asked. That still sounds like protection to me. Yellen said, it is ownership. Kethvorin shouted, do you not see? The Wardens have made humanity into a weapon. If your kind ever decides that another species threatens you, if you ever pray hard enough for their destruction, the Wardens will deliver it and there will be nothing anyone can do to stop them. The weight of his words settled over Yellen like a physical force. She had not considered this angle before, had not thought about what it meant for humanity to have the ear of beings who could unmake civilizations with a thought. We would never do that, she said. But her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. You do not know what you would do, Kethvorin replied. Your species is young and emotional and prone to violence. And throughout your history you have wished death upon your enemies with passionate intensity. And now those wishes have the power to become reality. The transmission ended, and Yellen sat alone with her thoughts as the galaxy continued to react to news that was reshaping everything within days. Younger species began arriving at the diplomatic station. Representatives of civilizations that had been bullied and threatened by the ancient powers for millennia. We wish to form an alliance with humanity, the Shelrani ambassador said, her insectoid features arranged in an expression of desperate hope. If the Wardens protect you, perhaps they will extend that protection to those who stand with you. Similar requests came from dozens of other species, all of them seeking shelter in humanity's shadow, all of them hoping that friendship with Earth might keep them safe from the dangers of the universe, and through it all. Yellen could not stop thinking about Kethvorin's last warning. Humanity had been given power beyond imagination, the power to destroy entire civilizations, simply by wishing for it hard enough, and now she needed to figure out what her species was going to do with that. Power the archivists were already calling for. Humanity's destruction, arguing that the risk of leaving such a dangerous weapon in the hands of such an emotional species was too great to tolerate, but the younger species were gathering around. Earth-like children, seeking protection from a storm the galaxy was dividing. And humanity stood at the center of the conflict. Whatever happened next would change the universe forever. The Galactic Assembly Hall was filled beyond capacity for the first time in 10,000 years. Representatives from every known species crowded into the massive chamber to hear. Humanity's response to the crisis that had consumed the galaxy for months. Ambassador Yelena Vasquez stood at the speaking platform, with the weight of her entire species resting on her shoulders, knowing that the words she spoke today would shape the future of the universe itself. Behind her, a delegation of human leaders sat in solemn silence. Scientists and politicians and philosophers who had debated endlessly about what humanity should do with the power they had discovered, and in the spaces between moments, invisible to every eye, but somehow felt by every soul in the chamber. The wardens watched. Before I deliver humanity's formal response, Yelena began, her voice carrying across the vast assembly. I want to share something that Dr. Marcus Chen discovered during his research into our history. She paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces. Throughout human history, we have prayed, she said. We have wished and hoped and begged for things with all our hearts. And according to what we now know about the wardens, those prayers had power. Real power that could reshape reality itself. Murmurs spread through the assembly, and Yelena could see fear in the eyes of those who understood where she was going. We prayed for our enemies to die, she continued. We wished for plagues upon nations and destruction upon cities, and vengeance upon those who had wronged us. And if Kethvorn is correct, if the wardens truly respond to human wishes, then those prayers should have been answered. She let the silence stretch for a long moment, but they were not, she said. Not in the way we asked, because for every human who prayed for destruction, another human prayed for mercy. For every wish of death, there was a wish for life. And our contradictions canceled each other out. The realization spread through the assembly like a wave. The wardens could not grant our wishes for destruction because we are not a unified species. Yelena explained, we argue and disagree and fight among ourselves about everything. And that chaos, that beautiful, stubborn chaos, has been our greatest protection against our own worst impulses. She turned to face the section where the archivists sat in judgment. You fear that we will weaponize the wardens against you, she said directly to Kethvorn. You believe that someday humanity will pray for your destruction, and your ancient civilization will be erased from existence. Kethvorn's visceral body flickered with barely contained tension. It is a reasonable fear, he replied. Your species has shown again and again that you are capable of great cruelty. Yes, Yelena agreed. Surprising the assembly, we are capable of cruelty and hatred and destruction. But we are also capable of compassion and love and creation. And those opposing forces exist within every single human being who has ever lived. She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. We have spent months discussing what to do with this power we have discovered, she said. Some of our leaders wanted to use it to threaten our enemies and demand concessions and reshape the galaxy according to our wishes. And I will not pretend that the temptation was not strong. The assembly held its breath, but we chose differently, Yelena announced. We chose to make a promise to ourselves and to all of you. A promise that will be written into our laws and taught to our children and remembered for as long as our species exists. She straightened her spine and spoke the words that humanity had agreed upon after countless hours of debate. We will not weaponize hope, she declared. We will not use the wardens as a threat or a tool of conquest. We will not pray for the destruction of any species, no matter what they do to us. And we will earn our place in this galaxy the same way we earned our place on Earth. Through struggle and effort and determination. Shock rippled through the assembly. You refuse this power? Kethvorn asked, disbelief evident in his resonating voice. We acknowledge that it exists, Yelena replied. But we choose not to use it because power without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. And we are not wise enough to play gods with the lives of other species. She turned to address the entire assembly. The archivists have lived for millions of years, she said. The Wardens have existed since before this universe began, and humanity has been a spacefaring species for less than a century. So who are we to decide who lives and dies, who deserves to exist, and who should be erased from reality? Her voice echoed through the vast chamber. We will continue to argue among ourselves, she said. We will disagree about everything from politics to philosophy to the proper way to prepare food. And that disagreement will keep us from ever unifying our wishes enough to harm anyone. She smiled. The first genuine smile she had allowed herself in months. We choose to remain human, she said. Messy and contradictory and frustrating and full of potential. And we will find our own way forward without relying on ancient beings to fight our battles for us. The assembly erupted into chaos. But it was a different kind of chaos than before, touched with something that might have been respect or admiration or simple relief in the spaces between moments. The Warden smiled. This was why they had stayed with humanity for so long. Why they had protected this chaotic species through countless millennia. Because humans had the capacity to surprise them in ways that no other species ever had given the power of gods. They chose to remain mortal given the ability to destroy. They chose to create given the option to dominate. They chose to cooperate. The youngest species in the galaxy had taught the oldest ones, a lesson that had been forgotten for billions of years. A simple truth that held the key to everything: power means nothing without the wisdom to refuse it. And in that refusal, humanity had earned something that no amount of force could have achieved: the respect of the universe. The archivists withdrew their demands for humanity's destruction, unable to argue against a species that had voluntarily surrendered the greatest weapon in existence. The younger species maintained their alliance with Earth, no longer out of fear, but out of genuine admiration, and the Wardens continued to watch from the shadows, proud of the children who had finally grown up enough to understand what it meant to be truly powerful. Earth was no longer quarantined. The galaxy's oldest species still kept their distance, but now it was out of respect rather than fear, and humanity stepped forward into a universe that would never see them the same way again, not as threats or weapons or cosmic accidents, but as something far more valuable, as proof that even the smallest species could choose to be better than their nature required, and that choice made all the difference.